What's going on, everybody? Jarrett with Jarrett Rushing Fishing, back with you again today. And as you can see, I'm not on the water. Something that I take pride in is being able to stay home whenever I do not have a tournament, and being able to spend time with my family, being able to go to church, see my friends, all of that fun stuff. And I'm taking this Sunday afternoon right now to really work on tackle rigging and line rigging. And as you can see, I've got a bunch of line here. And it got me to thinking. A lot of you out there have asked me on several occasions, Jarrett, what type of line do you use? Now that's, it's kind of funny because that's not as easily to, it's not as easy to tell you what kind of line I use as opposed to what type of condition. I know that's very vague, but any good fisherman out there will tell you I use different line based on different baits, different conditions, things like that. So I thought I'd run through some of the things that I'd like to deal with and that I like to use right here. Got them all set out front. Before we start this thing, a couple of housekeeping items. Number one, I'm not sponsored by any one line company. So if you know somebody that is a line manufacturer that wants to reach out, tell them to shoot me a message either here or on my social media accounts, Facebook and Instagram. I would love to visit with any one of these or any other line company for that matter, just to see what kind of deal we couldn't work out. But more than anything, I want y'all to make sure that you hit that subscribe button, like this video, turn on notifications, more than anything, tell your friends. This is a little bit of an educational deal, and we want to make sure that everybody knows what we do, how we do it, why we do it. So let's get started. So three main line types. You've got braid, you've got fluorocarbon, you got monofilament, and I throw all three of them. I'll go ahead and tell you, I grew up throwing monofilament all of my life. All of my reels, whenever I was a young boy, all had 17-pound strand monofilament on it. That was kind of one of the go-tos. 17 pounds seemed to be universal at the time, but since then I've actually learned that I can slack off, I can slim down and do a lot better. So I'll go ahead and tell y'all what my number one go-to line is. If I didn't have any other line at all, this would be the one, and you can see I've got three of them right here. One full spool, one partial spool, and then this partial spool. But it is Berkley Trilene, 15-pound big game. Y'all, 15-pound monofilament to me is one of the most universal lines out there for several reasons. Number one, monofilament stretches, whereas fluorocarbon and braid does not. So whenever I'm throwing monofilament, especially on crankbaits or topwater, I like that little bit of give, little bit of extra reaction time in there during the hook set process, because I have such a quick reaction. On crankbait, the first sign of a bite, I'm setting the hook really hard. And if I'm using a medium heavy, even with a fast action tip, sometimes I can yank that bait out of the fish's mouth. However, this 15-pound monofilament gives me just a little bit of extra stretch and gives me a 1 to 2 second delay before that hook sets into that fish. So that right there is pretty much what I use on my cranking stuff, or topwaters, 15-pound big game. I will go up to 17-pound if I'm throwing a bigger whopper plopper or a bigger buzz bait or something along those lines. And it really depends too on hooks. That's another thing that we forgot to mention. If I'm throwing something with trebles, I like to be able to use something that stretches just a little bit more because the wire is a little bit fine. If we're using something with a singular hook, such as a worm, jig, spinnerbait, things like that, I want something that doesn't stretch near as much. So again, my go-to right now on all of my cranking rods, right now as we speak, that's what's on it, 15-pound Berkley big game. I have my spinnerbait rods, and spinnerbait, I'm actually a fan of fluorocarbon. Now, thing is we've got several sets of fluorocarbon here. Again, going back to the old school, you can see this one only has a partial spool left, but this is strand, 17-pound fluorocarbon. I found that once I started using it, I was really a fan of the Berkley Trilene 17-pound fluorocarbon. And then even whenever I'm getting down to, crappie rigs, something a whole lot smaller, I will slim down, and I've used P-Line 8-pound fluorocarbon, and then the P-Line 15-pound fluorocarbon. Again, this right here is really dependent on size of the bait and conditions I'm fishing. If I'm on clear water reservoirs where I don't stand a chance to get caught up on a tree or a stump or anything along those lines, I will go with 15-pound P-Line fluorocarbon. However, if I'm around cypress trees, if I'm around a lot of slate rock, if I'm throwing a 3/8 ounce to a 1/2 ounce spinnerbait, then I'm going to go up with 17-pound just because that's my comfort range. Again, Fluorocarbon does not stretch, so you don't have that. So what you do whenever you set the hook, you're getting a good solid hook set. So you're not like throwing these on singular hooks, such as spinner baits, jigs, things like that. I did experiment a little bit this year, and I've become a little bit of a fan of Yo-Zuri Hybrid 15-pound fluorocarbon, again the hybrid line. And the hybrid line, what it's good for, again, no stretch, abrasive resistant, which is very important whenever you're talking about fishing around slate, fishing around rocks, fishing around bluffs, things along that line. But I'll tell you what I've liked about this is the castability of the hybrid versus the straight fluorocarbon. So we're talking about the pros and cons of each one as well. The fluorocarbon, you're going to get a straight line that's really smooth, but sometimes the castability, it'll just roll off of your spool. It really doesn't cast with the normal flow, with the normal projection of a cast. And if you're getting a little wind feedback, I do apologize. We got chickens running around the background, so you're going to have some background noise during this thing. But y'all, this is all live. This is one take, so y'all stick with me. Now, back on the hybrid line, what I found is it comes off of the spool a lot simpler. Now, what you do run into with the hybrid line is a little bit of give on it, and whenever you're throwing something on a fast action, a fast tip, sometimes you won't get that solid pull, that solid hook set, especially on a singular hook. So you've got to be careful. But if I'm throwing a 1/4 ounce spinnerbait and I'm throwing it around you know, the Clearwater reservoirs, Lake Ouachita, Lake Hamilton, Lake DeGray, I will slim down to the 15-pound and throw it, especially if I'm around the outer edges of bushes and things like that. So lastly, and again, right now I have 2 spinnerbait rods because I said I would do that with this as well. I have one of them rigged up with actually the 17-pound Trilene, and I have one right now rigged up with the 15-pound Yo-Zuri Hybrid. I'm probably going to pull that hybrid off because I'm going to be around cypress trees a lot here in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to put this P-line fluorocarbon back on it. So there's the fluorocarbon side of things. So right now, cranking sticks, top water, I got mono. Spinner baits and my flipping stick, I've got fluorocarbon. I've actually got 20-pound fluorocarbon on my flipping stick, which you all have watched my videos. You know I don't flip a whole lot, but whenever I do, I am throwing fluorocarbon. The other day, you saw a video of me throwing an A-rig. I was throwing on 17-pound Berkley Trilene, and it was fluorocarbon as well. I'm probably going to up that to about 20 or even 25-pound fluorocarbon, just because A-rigs are expensive. I want something a little bit stronger there. So last but not least, I've got my braid. Now, I don't typically throw braid a whole lot, even during the summer if I'm throwing frogs and things like that. However, on all of my spinning rigs, I have braid to a fluorocarbon leader, and this is one that I really want to hit hard because this is something I get asked a lot, especially with throwing Ned rigs and things like that. So I found that the Power Pro braid is kind of one of my favorites. You can see this is 10-pound. This is actually 50-pound test. If I start throwing frogs this summer, that's what I will use as 50-pound test. But right now, I have one of my spinning rigs with the Power Pro, and I figured this out last year. I love this line. I actually love this line with a passion. This is Suffix 832 10-pound braid as well. And so I've got one rigged up with this, one rigged up with this, but then my fluorocarbon leader. I usually use about 2 or 3 foot of leader on the end of every one of my spinning rigs. Figured this out about, it was in 2020. I went from throwing a straight fluoro to a braid fluoro mix, and I used the Alberto knot. I will post a video later on how I tie the Alberto, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. But I was having a lot of problem with every single time that I would throw a Ned rig, especially in the Arkansas River. I was having rocks, having that, you know, the really sharp rock on all the rock jetties that would cut the line, the fluorocarbon that is. So I was at 8-pound, I went up to 10-pound, I was still having the same problem. So I got online and I found this. This is P-line. This is the SS Leader fluorocarbon, and it's made for salmon and steelhead, which, you know, that's not typically a freshwater fish that bass fishermen are after. But I saw that, and the one thing that really tipped me off on that is both salmon and steelhead have big teeth. And the one thing that they promoted this line more than anything was that it was abrasive resistant. So I went out on a limb and I took a chance with this, and I'll tell you that was the best investment that I've ever made from a Ned rig standpoint. If you're throwing a shaky head, a Ned rig where you are going from a braid to a fluorocarbon, please look into this line. I promise you it's going to help you out in the long run. It is rather expensive and you only get it in 100-yard spools, but considering you're only using 2 or 3 feet at a time, 100 yards should last you at least a full year, maybe even a year or two. But that is my setup. So just a review. My go-to, number one, if I didn't have any other line in my boat and I just wanted one spool to last me the entire year, it would be Berkley Big Game. That's it, 15-pound test. That would do me all year long. I would lose some fish in certain situations, but that line right there is definitely one of my most favorites. The second one is the Trilene 17-pound fluorocarbon, followed by the P-Line fluorocarbon, and really starting to like the Yo-Zuri 15-pound hybrid fluorocarbon to nylon hybrid. And then last but not least, again, I've been throwing that Power Pro line. I like it. It's cheaper. It's a good braid. It comes off of the reel. But after I started using the Suffix last year, I fell in love with it. It's really smooth. It doesn't stick. It's easy to deal with if you've got a backlash or some sort of tangle in your reel, especially your spinning reel where your loops get tied in inside of the spool. This is really easy to guide out. Very, very little memory. But if I'm doing my fluorocarbon leader, I'm going to 10-pound test, salmon and steelhead, P-Line fluorocarbon leader. So again, everybody asks all the time, what line do I throw? Depends on the water clarity, depends on the size of bait that I'm throwing, depends on the vegetation or the cover type, but more than anything, it depends on the reel as well. Spinning rigs versus open face. I will say for those of y'all that are just going pan fishing, what I would recommend doing is having an 8-pound fluorocarbon, and that will probably be universal for you depending on what you want to use. Again, I personally am not sponsored by any one of these. You can tell that I've got 6 different lines here. I've got Yo-Zuri, P-Line, I've got some Strenz, some Trilene, some Berkley Big Game, which is a Trilene brand, and I've actually got some Seaguar in the shop that I haven't brought out as well. But these are the ones that I've been using more than any. So I hope you all enjoy this. Hope you found it beneficial. Go out and find which line you like to use on your own. Make sure that you do it on your own. You test these lines on your own and figure out which one best suits you for what it is that you're fishing. So, hope this is educational. Hope it's informative. Like always, y'all keep trying.